Hi guys, Gothy here, and I feel like this is a little bit of a confession time. So a few of you guys have realized over on Facebook that I'm selling quite a lot of my Fujifilm gear. So today I wanted to give you a little bit of a run through as to why lots of the gear that I own is up for sale. I've got all of my Fuji gear here, and whether or not I am ditching Fujifilm completely, because there seems to be a little bit of concern that maybe I'm leaving the brand in its entirety. Now, in short, that is not the case, but most of what you see on the table is being sold. Now for me, when it comes to photography and my gear, one of the most important factors is how the cameras feel. Do they actually make me want to pick them up and use them? And Fuji as a brand is exceptionally good at this, and especially for the price bracket that Fuji are in, I think they're probably the best in market. And I think this is the really important theme throughout this video. Gear that makes me feel something or compelled to take my camera out is staying, where everything else is on its way out, and most of it has already been replaced with something else. Now I think what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the gear that I'm keeping and then go through everything that's left and talk about why it's being sold. So first up then, in terms of gear that I am keeping, that is the X100V. Now this is one of the cameras that kind of kicked this channel off. It was purchasing this camera and making videos on it that I saw my first real growth on YouTube. So I do have a little bit of a soft spot for this camera. However, over time, I have found myself using it less and less. And the real reason for that is that in the situations where I'd picked this up, I now pick up my Leica M11. The two cameras are not really comparable, but I own both. And because I own both, this doesn't get that much use from me. Now, if it was up to me personally, I would probably sell this. However, there is one really important factor that means I won't be selling this, and that is the fact that Claire loves this camera and it is now basically hers. Any trip we go on and she wants to take photos, she'll ask me for this camera, and I'm more than happy to let her use it because it's really nice to share this hobby passion of mine with my girlfriend. So for me, this camera will be staying, but if it was personally my decision, I'd probably be putting it up for sale. Next up then, in terms of gear that I am keeping, is my favorite camera that Fujifilm have ever made, and that is the X Pro 2. For me, this is the quintessential Fujifilm camera. It has everything about the brand that makes it special, all in one little camera. The build and design of this camera is second to none. It feels great in the hands, it feels solidly made, and for me, the X Pro 2 has all of the things that were good about the X Pro 1, but it made slightly better, like a better sensor, better controls, and just a better feeling camera, but also none of the gimmicks that came with the X Pro 3. Personally, with the X Pro 3, I'm not a fan of the whole reverse screen thing, and I don't really like the fact they removed the dual magnification from the viewfinder as well. I love the 18mm crop sensor or 28mm full frame focal length, and this X Pro 2 allows me to do that using the optical viewfinder as well. The X Pro 3 dropped that, and you can't use the 28/18mm lenses with it. So for me, this is my favorite Fujifilm camera. I've made some videos on it before, and I'll continue to make videos using this camera into the future. And like I said at the start, one of the most important things for me when it comes to cameras is the feel and making me want to go out and shoot. And this is a camera that makes me do exactly that, and you can pick them up for pretty cheap now. Now the whole Fuji craze has died down a little bit. I actually bought this camera for £600, so I think I did a pretty good deal as well. And for the money, there's not much else out there that I would rather have. So if I'm keeping the X Pro 2, I need at least one lens for the camera. Now the lens for me, that's probably my favorite Fujifilm lens, is one of the first they made and also one of the first that I purchased. And that is this. This is the 23mm f2. For such a cheap lens and small lens, it's f2, it's weather sealed, the autofocus is pretty good as well, and matched with the X Pro 2, it's just a joy to use. I think this again is one of the best things about Fujifilm. If you're going for a crop sensor, you want a small compact lens, and this fills that niche and does it exceptionally well. Now the only other lens on this table that I am keeping is the 18mm f2. And that's because I absolutely love the 28mm focal length. And I also love small lenses. Beyond that, there's nothing really to love about this lens. The autofocus is a bit noisy. Anything off-center, wide open is a bit soft. It's not weather sealed. It's a pretty terrible lens in just about every way, other than it covering off my favorite focal length and also in a reasonably small size. The other thing as well is they don't really sell for that much money. So for the sake of maybe like £150, I would rather just have my favorite focal length than let it go. So these two lenses are the only two lenses that I'm keeping to go with the X Pro 2, which means everything else on this table is on its way out the door. So then we get on to why am I getting rid of everything else on the table, and it all kind of stems from the same reason, and that is the fact that I'm getting rid of my X-H2S. Now, I have loved this camera and I actually bought it on release. When this got released, I rushed down to my local camera shop and put a pre-order in. So I've had it for about 2 years now, 18 months, 2 years. And don't get me wrong, I've loved using it and it's become kind of the backbone of this YouTube channel. It's a camera that's not been featured much on the channel because it's the camera that you're normally looking through. And for that, it has been pretty good. But I have come to realize over the last few months that I have this exceptionally good hybrid camera that I only use for video. I very rarely use this for any photography at all because I'll use my other Fujis, the X Pro 2, the X100V, or my other Leicas, to the point that this became just a video camera. And it kind of links back to the start of this video. This camera is probably the only camera other than the X-H2 that Fuji make that just feels like any old other mirrorless camera on the market. So I'm not really getting anything from the feel department. And when it comes to the technical department, only being used for video, there's just better options out there. I've actually replaced this already, and you may have already seen it on the channel, with the Sony FX30. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in a future video as to exactly why I've made the transition. But one of the reasons is the fact that the Sony FX30, the whole build and design of that camera is video centric. And for some reason in my head, that just makes me treat it like a video camera and I want to take it out. And it just makes me do things a little bit differently because it is a very clearly video centric camera. And I guess when we get to the lenses, the main reason a lot of these lenses are going is the fact they just don't work very well on the X Pro 2. And for starters, that is the zoom lenses. So my 16mm to 55mm f2.8, my absolute workhorse lens, is on its way out. It's a little bit too heavy and unwieldy to be using this on the X Pro 2. It's a lens that I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with because optically it's really good, it's also weather sealed, it's also pretty quick at f2.8, but it is also a big, heavy, chunky lens. And I do find that whenever I took it out, especially with the X-H2S, which is also not a small camera, it's just felt like a really heavy package, especially considering the fact the whole thing is built around a crop sensor. So this is being sold because it doesn't really work on the X Pro 2. We then also have one of my favorite lenses on the Fuji system, the 70 to 300mm. Again, great lens, it's weather sealed and it's really small, kind of the opposite to that 16 to 55. The really small compact size of this lens has what got me using it the most. I really like doing wildlife photography, but I don't want to lug around a massive lens. This filled that niche, but again, on the X Pro 2, I'm not going to be needing it. Then the last of the zoom lenses is this, the 10 to 24mm, right? 10 to 24mm. This, since me purchasing it, has been one of my least used lenses. I thought I was going to use this a lot for video, but the reality is I found myself using the 16 to 55. In the whole time I've owned this lens, which is a couple years, maybe even more than a couple years at this point, because I think it's predated the X-H2S, I've barely used it. It's an okay lens. It's got optical stabilization, which works really well with the IBIS inside the X-H2S. I just didn't find myself using it all that much. Again, X Pro 2, it doesn't really work. And then we get to two prime lenses. Now, one of these was a really tough decision that I do think that maybe in the future I will come to regret, and that is the 33mm f1.4. This is a lens that is an all-round exceptional lens. The 50mm focal length, it's nice and versatile. f1.4, it's amazing. It's so sharp in the center, it's sharp in the corners. It's a lens that by just about every measure is a cracking lens. However, for me, it's just a little bit too big to work on the X Pro 2, and I decided that ultimately I would rather have smaller lenses, and I may in the future, depending on how I feel, buy a 35mm f2 to replace the 50mm focal length, because I think I will grow to miss this lens in the future. And ultimately, if I do miss it too much, I can always buy it back. And then the last prime, and to be honest, this wasn't so much of a difficult decision, is the 16mm f2.8. As much as I quite like the focal length and the fact that it operates exactly like the 23mm does, autofocus is pretty good, the weather sealing, it's nice, small and compact, the amount of distortion that I find I get from this lens just means I don't like using it. I find that at that 24mm focal length, there's just a little bit too much distortion for portraits, and some of the buildings that I took photos of, I think in Prague, was it Prague? You're gonna see some images up on the screen now, just felt like they were leaning back a little bit too far. So for me, also getting rid of this little guy. So what does all this actually mean? It means I'm keeping the X Pro 2 lenses and the X100V, and you'll continue to see Fujifilm content on the channel. If it wasn't for the fact that I was getting rid of my X-H2S, I'd probably be keeping a lot of the stuff here. But ultimately, because that camera is going, all of the zoom lenses and some of the gear I'd made around that camera just don't have a place here anymore. I said earlier that I've replaced this X-H2S with the FX30. I will be doing a dedicated video on why I made that switch coming up soon. But ultimately, guys, I am not leaving Fujifilm. You'll continue to see this gear here on the channel. And in the future, depending on what they do with the X Pro 4, you may see an X Pro 4 if and when it comes. I really hope they go with a normal screen or a tilt screen rather than that reverse flippy one. I don't really like gimmicks when it comes to cameras, so please, Fuji, don't mess around and just give us, or at least give me, what I want. I know a lot of you guys out there do like that reverse screen on the X Pro 3. But yeah, that's it. If you've got any questions about any of the gear you've seen in today's video, then feel free to reach out down in the comments. But Fujifilm content will continue on the channel, and I think we're gonna have a recipe video in the next few weeks. Thank you for watching, guys, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.